Today we're going to take it further into JavaScript. First thing, again, make sure that the server is running, and then let's go back into our code. We've talked last time about variables. So let's this time talk about statements and functions and other things that are important for the organization of the language. So we've learned last time about the Boolean variables, like 5 is greater than 4. That's true. But we will need to understand what happens if this is true. So this means we need an if statement. If 5 is greater than 4, then do something. Alert 5. And that's true. This is what JavaScript does. It has a statement, and if this statement is true, then it does this action. Let's see if it's not true. If 5 is greater than 6, then alert this. Nothing happens. You see? So this is what the if statement does. It checks for a certain condition. If this condition is met, it executes what happens after it. So let's try to do it a little differently. We can say that we can also do it with variables. So we can say like a is equal to 4 and b is equal to 5. So if a is greater than b, alert a. That's true, nothing happens. But if a is less than b, alert this. So this is what happens. So now you have some understanding of if statements. It's all about evaluating the Boolean variables that's inside. How about if we have different conditions? For example, if a is less than b and 3 is greater than 2. So for example, if a is less than b and 3 is greater than 2, alert this. It gives you this output because both of these conditions are met. A is less than b and 3 is greater than 2. Or we can make it in a better way. You can say like c is equal to 15. So our condition would be if a is less than b and a is also less than c. So it gives you this output. How about if one of them is just enough? For example, if a is less than b or a is equal to c. So we can say that if a is less than b, and this notation means or, a is equal to c. It works. How about if c, if we know that a is equal to 4, so how about if c is also equal to 4? And then we check the same statement and it also works because a is equal to c. You can also make it a different way, that if a is not equal to c, alert AA. Nothing happens because they are equal. If a is not equal to b, alert AA. and it happens because they are not equal. So you see that there are different ways of putting conditions into this if statement, and you can combine them together in different ways to get the condition that you want. Another very important statement is for, which is, they call it for loop, and it means that we have a sequence of actions that need to be done iteratively, one by one by one by one by one by one. So that's called a loop. So for a loop, you have to specify something. You have to specify the looping conditions. So we start with the for, and then we create some kind of an index, which is just a counter, and you say, give it a name. It can be I, variable I, and this I has a starting value of 0, for example, and we give it a condition where it will stop if I is less than 10. While I is less than 10, it will keep, this loop will keep running. And you specify how you increment it. So you say like I plus plus. So every time it adds 1 to this I until it is less than 10, until it is 10. And then give it a statement that it performs every time or every iteration of this loop. So we'll say that we'll give it this console.log, which is not the same as alert because it will just display it in the console. It's just like print statement in other programming languages. So we say console log hello and add to it the counter or the index. So this statement would tell us, or tell the browser, for the variable that is I, starting from the value of 0, as long as it is less than 10, keep adding 1, and every time you implement this loop, make sure to print this thing, which is hello, and the index, the counter value. So let's run it, and it's working because it's telling you from the first loop it is 0 and then 1 and then it's 2 and 3. So this is a definition of a loop. Then we'll move to something that's also very interesting, which is a function. But this, I think it's more appropriate to do it on the code itself because it would usually involve more lines, and there are some kind of tricks that we're going to talk about it as well. Here we have this code that we've developed from last time. So let's create something that is called function, which can be as simple as something called double, for example. So we have a number, and then we want to double it. So what we do is that we return, like this is the output of the function, and return 2 times number. What this function does is that it says if you give it a number as an input, it will double it and it will return it as double. So let's try it within this script. So we say console, so we say that a, variable a, is 5. So b is equal to double a. So let's say console.log b. Let's save it and run it here. Now it is giving us the value 10, which is the output of the double function. Once this function is defined, we can also use it in the console here. So we can say double 6, we give 12, double 100, we give you 200. So this is a function, and you can make it with different variables or more than one variable. For example, function add a b, and it would return a plus b. So we can say that sum is equal to add a b, and then we use this and say console log sum and refresh, and it's giving you the sum of the two variables. And you can say use it again here in the console, add 4 and 19, and it still works. One of the most critical things that we need to understand when we're talking about functions is something called local variables and global variables. Let me show you here. For example, let's call a variable called score. And give it a value of 10. And then a variable called score with a value of 15. Make sure it's within the function itself. So if I implement this double function, of course it will give me something about the output, but what I'm interested in is this score variable. Here I defined it outside the function, and here I defined it inside the function. And every time I give it this declaration that is a variable and give it different values. So let's say when we implement the function, what will the score be? Now I want to output the score, and now it's telling me it's 10. Although when I implemented it in the function, it should be 15. So what's happening? What's happening is actually, if I use this var declaration, it means that I'm defining the value of this variable for this context. So here, this is the same variable, this with the same name, but since it is defined globally from outside the function with this value, this one no longer works, or only applies within the scope of the function. Once you're outside the function, you go to the one that is global. How about if we remove this var from the variables that is from the variable that is within the function? We'll see what happens. Let's save it. 15. Now it's using the one that is inside. How about if we keep incrementing the value of the score? For example, score plus equals means that I'm incrementing the value, I'm adding to it 5. Whatever it is, I'm adding 5 to it. So let's see, and it's now 15. How about if we run the double again? Double 5, 10. Let me check now what is the score. It's 20, because every time I run the double function, it adds 5. So let's run it again. Double 100. So it doubles the 100, and see what happens to the score now. It's 25. So you see, every time we run this function, as long as we declare this variable globally first, and then we just refer to it when we're running the function, we will be able to use the same global value, and then we can increment to it or do any operations with it. So now we understand more about if statements, for loops, functions, global and local variables. This kind of knowledge is what's going to help us in building the app as we go along. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next lecture.